And let's go live. 3, 2, 1. This is Robert Mardlachi, the founder, co-founder, and CEO of C21 Canada. And welcome to today's C21 Canada special 10th anniversary webinar series featuring our C21 CIO K12 Leadership Alliance on the future of education. A little bit about C21 Canada is a leading not-for-profit organization promoting the accelerated change in teaching and learning practices across Canada. This past February, ironically, we were at a summit, a CEO Academy Summit in the Yukon, where we announced the C21 CIO Alliance. The mission of the CIO K12 Leadership Alliance, in concert with C21 CEO Academy, is to provide a national forum and voice for Canada's most progressive thinking K12 CIOs to focus on transforming, influencing, and accelerating and leading in the 21st century across all systems. Joining me today for our panel, our CIO members on future-proofing education that passes Prologue, we have Vinnie, Director of Innovation and Technology from the Lesserby Pearson School District in Montreal. Dr. Mario Chason is the founding chair of our CIO Alliance and is Director of Research, Innovation, and Change Management at District Scolaire Francophone Sud in New Brunswick. Peter Singh is the Executive Officer of IT Services at my alma mater, the Toronto District School Board, and Steve Wiffen, who's the Director of Instruction and CIO at School Division 43 in Coquitlam, BC. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen. I hope you're all healthy and well.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, very good.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Okay, we're going to kick this off with a 5-minute opportunity for each of you to speak about where you're at in the learning journey this past year. Ironically, it's almost a year ago that things officially shut down. I think it was March 13th for us in Ontario. And just about a year ago, I mentioned we were up in the Yukon. A lot has changed, lots of room for growth and lessons learned. And the pandemic has sparked innovation beyond what we imagined. To see 100% of educators using some form of tech-infused pedagogy was something I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. So there are a lot of positives, there are a lot of challenges. And so we're gonna kick it off with perhaps, we'll pass the baton over to you, Dr. Mario Chason, to kick things off. You've got 5 minutes to share your perspective on where you're at. And
yeah, very good. Thank you there, Robert. Yeah, yes, thank you again, to have the ability to share what's going on the East Coast, and looking forward to hear the story on the West Coast, and of course in the Central. Well, as everybody like since almost a year, I think I can resonate that in 3 words, on a daily basis, is how can we constantly adjusting, adapting, and adopting new practices. Ever since March break for us in the East Coast, we were less affected from a nation perspective. The first kind of quarter of the year, we were able there, to keep the Atlantic bubble kind of secured, and we were kind of living a good living, for lack of a better term. And suddenly, right after Christmas, it hit us, and it was very hard in terms of we have to close down the bubble, go back to provinces, and for the business or province normal business, now we had to go down to strictly restrictions, which has really affected the academic culture within this whole region. So yeah, that's been quite a challenge, because we never had to experience that at the early stage like many of you guys did, but then we certainly had to adapt that. So since there we have a diversity within our province, that we have normal kind of classroom, everybody's going to school. We have to the other extreme, that you got a teacher from home teaching to school, to students that they are at school through a supplier at the same time, not a supervisor, but I'm looking at the word there, des suppléants, and at the same time, you got also students, at home too. So we've got, the diversity of all contexts. So one word is like, malleable, and to be able to pursue and continue the learning. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much the learning experience of the students, and as well of the teachers, in how that as an organization, we're constantly addressing, the instant need of the communities, basically. So in a nutshell, we're not in a survival mode. We just like, be innovative and adapting.
And congratulations, you had an announcement recently you made.
Yeah, thank you for taking a moment. Yeah, so we finally, announced that we got this project called Interoperability, which is basically, en français, it's s'entreprendre. So you have 2 years in the making, and basically what we're trying to do is that we try to transform the community, that the community is becoming the school, and the school is becoming the innovative center of the community, responding to the local community needs. So it's a relationship between the community assets in terms of human resources, but as well as, all other resources that provide authentic learning to our students. And of course, providing the school a relationship more strongly with the community. Thank you.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Dr. Mario Chason. We're going to skip across the country virtually over to SD43 and Stephen Wiffen. Thank you for joining us today, Stephen.
Hey, I did prepare a couple of slides, so if it's okay, I'm just going to screen share there, Robert. Is that?
Yeah.
Oh, won't let me do that.
So I will stop my share.
Okay. Perfect. Great. Hopefully everybody can see that. Basically, I just wanted to tell a bit of our story using a bit of data, because I think that's something that's sort of very useful for people to kind of relate to their context and identify the things that have been experienced differently and similarly in different places. We look at sort of the experience we've had as being a year old now, really, pretty much, and not quite, maybe just slightly short. And we had this point in time where spring break came along, and like I think just everybody across the country, we went into spring break with things being pretty normal, and we came out of spring break with the world being totally different. And it's interesting to look at some of the data effects of that in terms of understanding what it is that you've just experienced. And I thought that might be useful to look at. So when we look at our context, story can really be told by the actions we took in the first 10 days of the experience. So coming back from spring break at the end of March, we deployed approximately 1,000 devices within 10 days to meet the needs of families who didn't already have. And we're a district of about 32,000 students. So 1,000 devices, I know in the context of most of the stories I'm hearing out there, certainly for larger districts, doesn't sound like very many out of 32,000. And that's because really it isn't in the whole scheme of things. I mean, 1,000 is still something to manage, but it's, and the fact that we could deploy that many in 10 days, I think was a testament to the organization of our IT team. But the reality is it says something about our community and the community readiness in terms of the amount of technology that was already there. In our particular context, our grade 6 to 12 population were already largely in possession of one-to-one technology to begin with, because we are a bring your own device district starting in grade 6. So very few gaps for us to deal with at 6 to 12. Our focus really was on the K to 5 level. But even with that, it only took us 1,000 devices to meet the need in the community. And so that, some of that may be socioeconomics and what have you. We're part of Vancouver here, so there is a bit of diversity across the board. We really even expected it to be higher than that. You do your surveys and things, and we had been for years around who had access to internet at home and who had technology at home. But I think this experience what goes beyond a survey. It tells you what really is, right? It's a census, if you will, of the technology use in families out there. And so that allowed us to get to a place where there was at least one device for every 2 students in a household, which was where we needed to land. And at 6 to 12, one device for every student. We had to facilitate access for all, but again, surprised to learn how much technology our students had. It was more than we expected. We only needed about 50 devices with LTE to meet immediate needs. And those were iPads with SIM cards in them that allowed families who could not realistically get internet into their location, even because they tended to be a bit migratory, or maybe they're in a basement suite where it couldn't be easily facilitated. Those had to be addressed, but again, limited to less than 50 devices. One of the great things that came out of this that I think is important around community partnerships is our big telecom here in BC, TELUS, stepped up and made subsidized internet available for families that didn't already have it. Just $9.95 a month. The school could nominate them as being eligible based on financial need. And that $9.95 a month for them is available for 2 years. So even though they got it during the pandemic, we now know those families have that available to them for 2 years. It becomes a bit complicated if they move from one place to another, but I think that was a big plus, having that sort of connection. But then to dig into the data a bit more, a huge part of this experience is teacher support. And so we tracked on a weekly basis the activity that our teachers were engaging in around learning. And there's a lot to talk about here, but really, to make a long story short, we started rolling out daily training webinars in hybrid learning tools and remote learning tools. Our focus is on Microsoft Office environment, Teams, and OneNote for Classroom. That is our base platform. And fresh grade at K-5. We have a large fresh grade adoption rate at K-5. So if you look at our approximately 2,000 teachers that we have, you can see from our participation rate levels around things like introduction to Teams, we had maybe about a quarter of them coming in on a daily basis to watch live seminars, webinars about these pieces. And then a subsequent, in this case, 680 of them were following up with the recordings afterwards. So that's about potentially half our population that was exposed to each of those particular areas. And then we could see how those numbers were responding to particular topics. And we always talked about a 1 week pivot. So if we saw that in a particular topic area, interest in it, enrollment in it was declining, we gave our team a week to pivot to something else, get more information about what teachers needed so that we could bring the capacity level up. Now, all of this is not based on capacity coming from nowhere. We actually had about 40% of our district users, which was just approximately 35,000 that you see on, that includes staff and students. Approximately 40% of them were already using Teams on a daily basis. So we had this great capacity we were coming from to begin with, and I don't think you could have ramped it up easily without having a bit of capacity as a starting point. But this graph here is very interesting because it shows overall Office 365 usage. There's a bit hard to read, I know, but there's an orange line in the middle that's our Teams usage. That was running at about 40% of daily active users. And then you see it flatline for 2 weeks. That's spring break. Okay, so that's spring break there. And then coming out of spring break, you literally see the ramp shape, the ramp up that occurred right afterwards.
Wow.
So not only did we go from, maybe about half of our users using Office 365 on a daily basis and 40% of them using Teams, we went to almost all of our users using Office 365 on a daily basis and 95% of them using Teams after spring break. That was a fundamental shift in engagement. And we had evidence of this baseline to begin with that was helpful, but it was really interesting for us to see how quickly that usage ramped up. And out of that, and then similarly, this is important for K-5, we saw about a 50% increase, not quite 40% increase in the usage of portfolios and fresh grade at K-5, which is the platform of choice in that area. So using these numbers, we're able to paint a bit of a picture for how quickly our teachers were able to adopt tools that supported this remote learning experience. And all of our plans out of that draw on that experience to make sure that we're addressing gaps as opposed to just moving forward in kind of ad hoc ways.
Amazing. Any surprises?
Well, I think maybe the biggest surprise is how certain training elements that we felt like teachers would need didn't end up being the pieces that they need. And so that's where that pivot capability, paying attention to the data, becomes so important, because your gut tells you there's something that teachers need to move forward this.
Right.
But then when you start to look at the data, it tells you a bit of a different narrative. And so you need to put those two pieces. I don't think you can look at data without having the story behind it. You still need to go out and have the conversations and develop the narrative. But layering that with the data really allows you to triangulate in a way that gives you much more powerful information around how you should pivot next to support this.
So from what I recall, you mentioned about 90% of the kids are actually in school, and you never stopped school.
Well, we did stop school between March and June.
Okay.
And but we first had students coming back in June, and then subsequent to that, we had all of our students back in September, with the exception of about 10% who initially went on a gradual return program. And as we stand today, about half of them have now returned.
How are the students doing? How's their well-being?
Well, that's a pretty broad question. I think.
Are they?
I think, in any large population, there's going to be some variation to that. One of the reasons we prioritize kids coming back to school is because we felt them being in school was the best thing for their well-being, ultimately. And so that was our approach.
Are they able to do fitness activities and that sort of thing, or
and all of those type of classes? If you look at our traditional, PE structures, music's highly affected by it. All of those classes have been impacted because they have so many restrictions in place now. But you can still find ways for kids to interact and play games and do things that are positive, both emotionally and physically, without, allowing the same level of physical participation that may have existed before. We just have to sort of step outside of the box. In some places, rethink how the curriculum works around those programs and that type of thing.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Stephen Wiffen. Now we're going to skip back across to Kurt Vinnie, the Director of Innovation and Technology at the Lester B. Pearson School District in Montreal. Thank you for joining us today, Kurt.
Thanks, Robert. Well, that's quite impressive, Stephen. Great to have kept all the stats like that on the training and everything. So I think about a year ago, right before COVID started, I had just returned from a trip to visiting a school board or a school district north of Denver that was really doing some interesting stuff. And I was really excited in implementing some of the things, or copying some of it, or building upon it for our board. And then COVID hit, and I guess the innovation took on a whole new meaning at that point. It wasn't just about, preparing students for an unknown future. The unknown future was here for all of us. So a very interesting pivot there. So, I mean, we're doing pretty well as a board. And I guess we also closed from March till about June, like all the buildings were physically closed. But it was actually the Ministry of Education that was providing a lot of the content. And we had a similar program with iPads and TELUS to provide them to some students who didn't have internet at home. And there's also a similar program in Quebec where families in need can apply for low-cost internet at home. We as a board are not allowed to, purchase a connection from TELUS to go into someone's house. But one thing that we could do would be to provide like an LTE stick or something like that. But it still doesn't guarantee. It doesn't guarantee coverage because there are areas that don't have good LTE either. So it's always an evolving concern. So yeah, we were shut until December, and we basically spent the summer prepping. We were actually prepping for 100% online in September, as we didn't know where things were going to happen. So the Ministry of Education gave us more money to buy devices, but obviously at the same time we had to train the teachers, and we already were a district or school board heavily invested in deep learning, and teachers had a lot of familiarity with Google Apps for Education and Google Classroom already, but that was more in a support role. It wasn't in a live role. The sort of online stuff was more concentrated on summer school. We were doing online courses, but other than that, it was mostly for support purposes. There was a massive PD effort there developed in-house by our educational services department. And the ministry had regular check-ins with us. They were asking us once a month, how many devices have you received? How many families need devices? And for us, it wasn't even a question of, one device per household. It was one device per student. So, if you didn't have more than like 6 hours of dedicated access to a computer for a child in your district, you had to help them work through that. And so we spent a lot of time figuring out which devices we could get, which devices were the best, and how to configure them as well, because a lot of time it's the configuration that makes a difference. So back in September, we opened up fully, but we did create an online academy. So we have about 700 students who are 100% remote, and that's usually they have some sort of exception, but the government was actually quite strict about who would qualify for that sort of instruction. But that required a lot of resources because it's not a true school. The students still belong to their home schools, and they're just, or to their local school, but they're also a member of this online academy. So that was a big role. And I think since September, the main thing is the ability to pivot, because you never know from one week to the next when whether you're gonna have to close a classroom bubble. And so we actually developed a system in-house to do that, to automate the notifications to the public health, to parents, to students in the affected class and in the school to give them notifications. So that saved a lot of work as well. And in terms of how my job has changed, there's been a huge shift and focus on information security. And that's directives coming from the ministry as well, because obviously we have a lot less control over our campus size or our district devices, because basically it's almost completely BYOD for anyone who's learning from home. And there's a lot of resources, plus supporting everyone who's working from home. So, moving more to cloud solutions, figuring out how to use, Google device management, other MDM platforms, VPN, whatever else. So has been extremely busy from that perspective as well. And obviously on the teaching side, there's been a lot of changes as well. And, we're spending a lot of time with the online school. The consultants are doing a lot more small group and one-on-one support. Workshop formats have changed to go online. And the other big thing is we're supporting parents as well. So we changed our IT support model, which used to be, we'd have someone go to a school every Monday and then another school on Tuesday. But now it's, come into the, virtually into the help desk. We figure out whether we need to dispatch someone, but there's a whole new level of, 40,000 parents that we're now supporting too. So.
Thank you so much for that, Kurt. Any surprises?
I think the surprises have mostly been positive. The resilience of the students and the teachers and stuff. I mean, this, there could have been a lot of grumbling, but I think people have really been very heroic in how they've handled this. And another part is, never really mentioned are the daycare workers, because we were actually operating emergency daycares for first responders, children throughout the entire thing. So
kudos to you for that. Thank you so much, Kurt Vinnie from Lester B. Pearson. Last but not least, Peter Singh from my alma mater, the Toronto District School Board, Executive Officer of IT Services.
Well, thank you, Robert, and good afternoon to everyone who's jumped on this discussion on a snowy afternoon here in Toronto. Our story is pretty much like what Stephen shared. I think you have to go through the numbers to understand the overall impact. Being a big school district supporting 245,000 students and full-time teaching staff close to 16,000 and occasional pool, which is like 8,000 additional teachers. Like everyone else, so we ended up in the same exercise when we went into remote learning in last March, asking parents, what would you need from us? Do you need a device? Do you have internet at home? So we started to fulfill those requests, and we actually, by the time we were done, it was like 60,000 devices we shipped to the family homes. So that was a huge undertaking for us. From IT, we turned into a bit of a logistics company, and we feel totally good today that all of us can launch a parallel logistics company to manage it now as a side business. And that was quite a bit of learning that happened during that phase. And similar things where Stephen shared that they needed some LTE iPads to support few families. Our number was around 7,600 families told us they didn't have internet service at home. And so that was same model. We went to an LTE based iPad tech quickly, working with Rogers and Apples to get it out there to the families. So that was initial launch. Then came the fall, and we surveyed the families, say, could you please share with us if you're going to be sending kids to brick and mortar, or they're going to be actually staying in the virtual mode. Our virtual schools, if you look at it, it's a little over 80,000, close to 82,000 kids are in virtual schools right now, and split over 4 elementary schools and 1 secondary school itself. And that's like 8th largest school board in Ontario, if you look at the number-wise. So it's a huge undertaking. And one of the challenges we saw right away, our ratio of admin support to student was way off in virtual school. So we needed to quickly reorg across the school system to bring additional principal, vice principals to support the families. And the real velocity or veracity of queries coming from parents, we could not respond to them in timely fashion. So, and again, so that was a huge undertaking for us to quickly mitigate that. And the second piece we did was we also give families options. One option they had in September to tell us if they're going to be virtual school or brick and mortar. Then later in the fall, we give them a second chance if they want to still change their mind. So of course, 10,000 families changed their mind. And we had to actually now worry about transfer back and forth. And we also promised other opportunity, which was in February around Family Day long weekend, saying, tell us if you're still okay with the virtual learning or you want kid going back to brick and mortar. And another 6,000 families told us they changed their mind. So those transitions has been a little painful from a logistics side of things, because you actually breaking the relationship of teacher to student in the class. So new kids are coming into your class, kids are leaving, they're going into a different one. So there's been quite a bit of behind the scenes activity to get it right for the parents. And I think during all this time period, we also realized that from a technology perspective, IT perspective, the support model we had in place to look after the parents wasn't adequate. And we needed to explore different channels to reach out to those families. Yes, we did the chats, we did the telephone lines, and we set up Google Forms to take their input right away and respond to them. I think one of the pieces I saw was that you cannot just live with the 1 or 2, 3 languages as part of your core team. You needed a wider range of individuals working in your teams who can speak multiple languages. We were just lucky that within our own IT shop, we could actually reach out to folks in 19 different languages. So in some cases, parents did not understand what we were trying to do with them. The moment person reached out to them in their mother tongue, the problem seemed to disappear. They were able to see what needed to happen. So that was it's a huge learning for us, saying, how do you position yourself from a support perspective if this fork in the road moment is going to stay with us in education? Virtual learning was here to stay. We talked about e-learning, online, and remote learning. This mix, I won't call it cocktail, but these multiple flavors will be with us. I think we needed to change and redo our strategies and see how are we going to deal and manage with this new norm. I think that has been one of the key pieces for us on TDSB side. In the fall, school kids who went into virtual school, they still wanted more devices. So since then, we have shipped around 11,000 devices. Some of the brick and mortar schools still needed some devices, so schools shipped another 8,000 or so. So I will say another 20,000 devices since school opening, on top of 60,000 we shipped, has gone to the families. The government, federal and provincial, they're all been very supportive. The COVID funding has been coming in. And we have never launched that 101 program here at TDSB. And Stephen's team on the West Coast has done it a few years back. We could not have a sustainable funding and model. Now those 101 discussions are on the table. We are working along with the trustees. We're working with our finance to understand how we can come up with a sustainable model to make this happen. So because if you want to solve these problems permanently, we need to have permanent solutions on the table. Another challenge was around lack of internet technology at home. So, and I'm glad TELUS did that on the West Coast. And similarly, I think in the Ontario, Rogers run a similar program with the Toronto Housing Department where everyone can have access to a basic internet for $9.99. But that does not apply to all families. So the way we run a nutritional program at TDSP to help those families around breakfast and other needs, we needed to come up with a model with those selected few families who also need help around not just a device, also for internet. So that's another proposal I'm working along with the telcos here in Ontario, saying, what can you do for us so we can actually create that sustainable model in Ontario, or I mean the city of Toronto market? We don't want to compete against their other business, but there are some families who will still need help from us. And one of the surprising uncovering during those discussions was that some of the shelters in Toronto already have free Wi-Fi available. I didn't know that. So that learning was huge for us. If there is one of our learners ends up in a shelter, as long as they have a device on them, they can still continue with their learning. So that's a huge, huge relief for us to learn some of those basics. But again, every city is different, every town is different. But I think some of these basic things I believe they need to be in place in every single city across the country. On the adoption side, on learning management system side, we've seen a huge uptake of Brightspace. When we compare the data from previous fall to this fall, the numbers went up by 630%. 630%. When we start to see the number of teacher and student logins into D2L/Brightspace, that went up by 2,748%. Right? So talk about tracking data and looking at over 200,000 parent logins into the same ecosystem during the fall. And that, to me, we did quite a bit of work to get a single sign-on the parent side here at TDSP. And seeing that kind of engagement from parents working along with the teachers into the same ecosystem, I think there's a huge opportunity for us to really, really bring parents into the mix. Parents are always into the mix, but this really brings them into the virtual learning environment at the same time for us. We saw over 600,000 activity feed posts during the same 3 months compared to the previous year. On the teacher side, we needed to provide PD also, and it wasn't just a straight cut, teachers, here's your device, or borrow one from your school and set up your online over Zoom or Google Meet, and you're all set to go. A lot of them needed help. So we put together close to 120 different, I will say, topics, sessions for them so they can actually pursue their own learning. And we did around 1,100 or so sessions with those topics. And we saw close to 42,000 attendees going through those learning opportunities. So I think part of the planning as we look at this one, we needed to also, not just the devices or the teacher PD, the third important piece is, do we have the right digital tools? So our library folks and others have been working constantly to make sure the right digital tools are also available for our online learning. At the same time, explore opportunities. How can we grow that footprint across all schools within TDSP? I can continue for another 10 minutes to tell TDSP story. I'll take a pause. I know you have some really good questions for us lined up.
I gave you an extra minute because I'm a proud alumni of TDSP, Peter. So
Thank you.
Got the inside track.
Thank you for the bonus 60 seconds, sir.
No worries. But thank you for that. Any surprise? I mean, sounds like there were a lot of surprises. Anything? I mean, the equity piece really jumps out in all your cases, and just that adaptation and ensuring there's equitable internet access. Same with educators in terms of professional learning. From the internet perspective, how did the district fare overall, and what impact will this have on your future proofing from an access perspective when it comes to the internet, because there's been challenges right across the country. Homes in the Toronto area, 2 out of 5 were experiencing issues. So great to be doing blended or hybrid or remote, but if we don't have access, that presents a huge challenge. So anyone want to jump in and perhaps give their perspective on it and how they address it? Stephen, not to point anybody out.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think that one of the conclusions we came to is that this is a sort of multi-agency issue, right? So when you look at access, there's more to it than just can you access learning. There's a fundamental communication element. There's a access to information element, and which we know, the reason why, as a successful democracy here in Canada, we have institutions like the CBC is because it was always valued to have all Canadians have access to a baseline of public information. And so what does that look like in the world where most of the information you get is starting to come not from a radio, but or even a TV, but from internet? And so there's a fundamental piece to look at there. There's a community health element to it that's really important. So when you put this all together, I think it's incumbent on us as the school system to play an organizing role in all of this, but not to necessarily be the sole source solution to the problem. And so for us, I talked about the role of the telecom in making subsidized option available. But since we've come into the new school year, and that offering by our local telecom has effectively wrapped up, we've built some connections with local charities who are more than willing to do things like subsidize internet for families who are in greatest need. And it's just a matter of finding what the resources are that's available out there, which potential support opportunities match up with mandates of other, both public, but also just non-public but non-profit organizations that are out and have mandates that maybe align with that type of thing, and then create a bit of organization around it. And I think that's the real opportunity here, is for us to, we do it with things like food programs, have for a long time. Where does this fundamental communication component of it start to fit in with those must have access to this, because it's about general health and well-being of our community?
Thank you for that. Is Chris Kennedy, the superintendent of West Vancouver, commented on the blog, if we can have regular garbage pickup, we should have stable internet. That got people's attention. Dr. Mario Chason in New Brunswick, way back, Information Highway Network of Innovative Schools. I always cited New Brunswick is an absolute leader in being the most fibered, connected province in all of Canada. How are you guys doing? You're muted.
Yeah, that's a very good. You bring back the old archives there.
Yes.
It's a great segue to kick off this conversation.
I've been around a while in this space.
I guess, yeah. Yeah, we're going back in the age of like 2004 to 2010. That was the era that, that people like Dave Robert, John Kershaw was at the leadership at the province, and they make tremendous strive, to invest in, can have a vision about the robot, like a robust, information highway, so we can having the ability now to reflect on how that we can transform the education system as a whole. And since it's as thing goes on, things fly. And, they definitely the culture has shifted slightly. We're still aiming that to the ongoing system. We have two culture. We got the francophone culture, and we have the anglophone culture that differs somewhat. But at the end of the day, we need to deliver it, and to deliver the education system per se. So to that, we're definitely trying to think about how that. And the reality from the Atlantic provinces is completely different from the central and the Pacific. However, we will still be accountable and make sure that the equity piece is addressed it, and we try to address this as the best ability, from a province perspective and also from a district and from a community, like Stephen was saying, is how that we can, embrace and the community assets and resources and to make sure that, we can support the families. That's one thing. Even though they can have activity, internet activity or access, and you had a device, at the end of the day, it's the learning experience. And that cannot push that aside, the quality of learning. So we have moving from a passive active learning, and I'm saying passive, I say that with reservation, right? Is that what I'm trying to say is at school, the passive learner was like, listening, like, when the teachers were delivering the content, and that's especially aiming from the high school perspective, because here in New Brunswick, we're aiming 50%. At the high schools, which means that students going, 1 day out of 2 at school. So what do you do with the off day? Well, the learning still occur, right? Okay, there's either in a high flex mode or hybrid or whatever methodologies, it's the learning still could be continuing. So the whole embraces of how do we make sure that the learnings occur, all the time. So we're talking about the active learning structure, so the pedagogical practice. So we're invested a lot of time of formal training on what is project-based learning, what is challenge-based learning, what's inquiry-based learning, what is UDL, in the format that we're still delivering, deep learning experience for the students, either at school or at home, in how that they can embrace, the community assets to learn. So a lot of entrepreneurship is kind of, or experiential learning start, to dive in and say, how can I, with my 50% of the time at school, what is structured, how can I, maybe enrich or deepened, my learning experience within the community. So that's kind of the element, we're starting to think about how that we can, mobilize.
Fascinating. And you're looking beyond the pandemic, and it sparked this quote that I want to share that was in our Mindshare report this week. At the end of the day, it's not just about delivering classes by replicating the in-person experience online, but finding ways to automate mundane tasks while ensuring student engagement and success.
Yeah, and I could agree more. This, and
right?
let's find success, right? Okay,
it's not rocket science that we're talking about here.
Right? We're actually talking about two things. We're talking about acquisition of knowledge, right? It is in competencies development, right? At the same time, that that would reaching the need of the industry or the local community.
And just as your roles have become mission critical, the teacher roles have become that much more mission critical and evolved.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
We're talking about a systemic mindset of role. And I think that reflecting an OECD report they mentioned, we kind of know that when the digital industry came in, there's a kind of a myth, like this education system was fading away, and we're seeing it now through experience now. So there's a kind of a mismatch. The mismatch is like, what is the role? What was the role of the students before COVID, and what's the role now? Well, there's a similarity with the teachers, the principal, the district, and the industry. So OECD mentioned, before COVID, the education system was kind of failing. So now after COVID, going back to the natural format, it's not an option. So we really have to rethink about and redesign, so redefining learning of this.
And I know you did a whole PhD on that, so we can make this a whole series if we wanted to with you, no doubt.
Have a lot of fun, yeah.
Any other thoughts from Peter or Kurt around internet access? I know there's been a call for a Royal Commission, a task force nationally, not only to do with the internet challenge, but also equity, indigenization of learning, and a number of other well-being. There are a number of issues at play that have national common interest. And I know that the health national health program was sparked around a similar rallying cry that were common challenges that we had. Any thoughts on that? I know it's a tough question, Peter.
No, definitely. I'll address the internet piece first. I was on another panel earlier, I think last week. We talked about the digital divide in urban cities. So that was an interesting chat, and it ended up also, what does internet access looks like? I think it has to be thought through the lens of its utility now. And then, to me, opportunity is here now the governments needed to look at it saying, how do we actually help the families who actually really need help from us? We have those tax credits, child benefits, and there is fundamentally, we know which families are low income families in our society. So the governments can easily say, we're going to put aside $25, $30 a month just for internet access. If we really want to take this economy, paper-based, heavy on human processes, to really become modern digital society, like some of the other governments have really moved ahead, we needed to have this plumbing in place, right? Smartphone access cell alone is not going to help. We live in a country where cell connectivity works well around the main highways, but you go away from them, it started to deteriorate. So you need a connected connection. And behind every Wi-Fi and cell network, there's a wire behind it. So you need to create that infrastructure. So here's an opportunity again, governments to step up, build the core infrastructure, and then also offer some financial help to the families who can actually translate those dollars into putting kids online and having access to it. So end of the day, the whole burden should not be just on the school system to do that. We need other partners at the table. And we're not saying everyone in our system needs it. It's a very small percentage. It's less than 3% of the families and the kids who need that kind of help. So if we believe in equity, and we wanted to fly that flag, then we need to come to the table, all entities together, saying we can address this problem permanently. I think opportunity is here. We know the data is in our hands, and we know who needs the help. Now is the time to take action.
Thank you for that, Peter. The notion of it takes a digital village to raise a child in the 21st century never has rung more true than today in this pandemic crisis. Over to you, Kurt, for final thoughts on the internet challenge and opportunity.
I think, I think looking at it as a utility is a really, really great approach. But I think the other question is, is internet access considered to be a human right, right? I know there were some, about 10 years ago, there was a lot of talk about that. And I think that's something that if Canada hasn't committed to, we would want to be looking at a very high level and go from there. I know there've been a lot of initiatives to expand the amount of internet access available, but I think that's one of the biggest challenges right now is the infrastructure. And I think, companies like Starlink coming in with low orbit satellite-based internet could be a game changer. But once again, it comes down to who pays for it. Is it affordable? And there are right now, I know Starlink is rolling out across Canada. There's some people just west of Ottawa that have it, and on the other areas in Eastern Ontario as well. So it's just a matter of time before we get a much more coverage of the country than we've ever had in the past.
Thank you for that. So I'm curious, are all of you offering 24/7 support? I know that's a challenge. Are you outsourcing? Are you looking at that? Are you using AI bots? There's all kinds of new innovations happening around that. Anyone want to lead on that question?
I can start on that one,
Okay.
Robert. So we're not a 24/7 shop for sure. And our typical, from a support perspective, we're looking at from 8 to 5. And that's how the departments are built. That's how the union contracts are written. And we don't have that kind of flexibility to extend those hours. But technology does help. And we've been making sure that the entire ecosystem is up and running. And if there is a challenge, we're able to activate some of those teams to help and address those. So from an outcome side of things, yes, we have it there. And yes, people can reach out, but it's very hard to respond in a timely fashion after hours for sure. The AI side and everything else is slowly coming into our lives. And some school boards I know have done it. And we're gearing towards that this fall. So we can actually do more with less when it comes to automation on that front from a customer service side of things. So that's where we are as a TDSB.
Yeah, when you're a union shop, that presents massive challenges around cost structures, etc. Stephen Wiffen, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, we have, as I'm sure most of the larger districts do, a fairly robust in-house support structure in place for staff and for school sites. But those structures don't extend beyond kind of the school boundaries to home and to families, and right. So the approach we took with that was because we are a bring your own device district, all of our secondary schools already had established student-run support desks in place.
And what do you call that? Is that the pedagogical support desk concept?
No, the pedagogical support desk is completely different. That's actually for teachers to ask for help on how to use technology to support their pedagogy.
Right.
But this is just a technical support desk run by students for
Brilliant.
students. All
That's
the secondary schools had that. And it's built into our leadership programs here. So it's part of course credit for those leadership kids. They get technical training themselves. And in those schools, they'll have a block where they go and sit in a technical support room, and they all rotate times so that there's full coverage throughout the day. And that way, when a student is in a class and they run into a BYOD issue on their X device, literally you deploy another student to go help them. So that's how our structures at high schools have worked. We extended that last year to not just the high school, but the family of schools. So the elementary schools that fed them, and middle schools that were in that chain, those students started remotely supporting that entire family of schools, so that when at home the families experience problems, connecting to the system or getting started in Teams and Office 365, they would put in a request, and then a student leader would connect with them and provide them with technical support. So that was the approach we took.
Fascinating innovation and student engagement. The learning is phenomenal. It goes to Dr. Mario Chason's perspective, is that learning is ubiquitous and it's in the community. I know he's chomping at the bit to have a few words on this, because if you're in the community, you need more access to supports. And I was going to say one other thing, but it'll come back to me. So over to you, Mario, about the notion of 24/7. The community is the school. Parents need, supports, etc.
Yeah, it's a powerful questions. At the end of the day, with this pandemic, the real learner are the parents. The more and more, because the teacher's format has been teaching that, I need to personalize my student learning in the classroom. Now I have to do that from a residential perspective. And that's things Stephen actually mentioned with data set as well. So the whole perspective of that, of the analysis behind that, we got some kind of a 3 type of domain. And the first domain is the private domain. We're talking about the residential, the public domain, which is basically, everything that we're doing internally. And after that, and how that we can mobilize assets within the community to support each other. Right. So at this point, the school's becoming a resource to the community, and how that you can leverage that. There's all kind of solution like that. And you also, I want to, dwell more on that. I think that the summarize of all the conversation is basically the same thing. It's a community movement to support each other. That's very kind of important. And how do we can do that in an effective and efficient way? So we get partners, like Bell Alliance, 1-800 numbers that provide support. So we got, organization, IT organization said, here's my number. Parents can call me, the student couldn't call me. And,
so some outsourcing could be a trend in the future, in terms of partnerships, because you're limited in terms of your capacity to,
the key, the key behind that is I know someone, right? So somebody will come on a question and say, oh, I know someone, I'll get you connected, right? That and that's the key that we're talking now. It's about relationship and community building, right? The more you do,
and that's a question I have, but hold that question. Kurt, thank you for that. Any final thoughts around the notion of support beyond the regular hours, and where are you at with that?
Yeah, there's a procurement group that's provincial that actually looked at creating a help desk for parents that would have run. It wasn't 24/7, but it would have been Saturdays and later at night, sort of like a homework help type thing. But it actually didn't go anywhere. And I think the main reason is because that third party wouldn't have been able to really do that much. I mean, if a parent called in and said, my device isn't working, you know, it's like, well, call the manufacturer, or, you know, we can't change the password, or we can't get into this. Well, they're not going to have the ability to do that either. So
Right.
that you'd need to crack that before being able to have a centralized type of solution. But you know, we basically run from about 7 to 7:30 in the morning till around 6 at night, and then I mean our systems are on all the time. A lot of our systems are cloud-based.
I could definitely see. Thank you for that. I can definitely see AI playing and bots playing a role with, because you get repeated questions that could be answered and made available for sure on that. The comment that I was going to make is to our guests, to our viewers, thank you for joining us today. Please drop your questions in the chat. I know some of our participants, speakers have been responding to them. We are coming down to a few final minutes, and I want to jump on a couple of really important questions here around the future. Back to school, September 2021. What's going to be different? What will the classroom of the future look like in 2022 as well? Little crystal ball gazing, perhaps. Stephen Wiffen.
Okay, go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, okay. I guess what I would say is we want to be a bit cautious about predicting exactly what next September is going to look like, because there's still a lot of variables out there. But our core message, I think, has a certain similarity to this September, which is that prepare for some layer of hybrid learning as part of the mix. Now, I'm coming at it from a certain biased perspective. I would just like to see the hybrid learning be permanently part of the mix, right? So I may have a bit of bias built into that,
right.
You know, that push, this notion that teachers are starting to reframe how they approach planning for the curriculum, how they design their instructional year, so that they know there's components that smoothly move into being supported in that online way. And we told them to plan that way this September, because if you end up getting the instructional hours in the classroom and the technology's there, you haven't lost anything, right? In terms of how you planned. It just gives you total flexibility. So that initial push to deal with it as a flexibility strategy, I think, was really valuable. Our focus, even right now, is in shifting that discussion to best practice. Because I think only by getting to this place where we're talking about hybrid learning from a best practice perspective, does the reason for approaching it move away from we're doing this because we don't know what's going to happen next, to we're doing this because actually there's really good learning strategies baked into this. And we want to use this opportunity to create some of that classroom experience transformation that many of us have envisioned for some time. And it'll be pretty easy for things to kick back to normal if we don't shift our attention to best practice focus and not just emergency response.
Brilliantly said. Thank you for that. Peter, you were chomping at the bit there.
No, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Stephen, for sharing that one. I think the thinking is along the same lines. And I think we're going to be a lot more better prepared than previous years.
Mm-hmm.
There won't be any excuse that this lack of technology. That excuse is out the window. There's no excuse around digital fluency for students and teachers. We cannot tell that you didn't do anything for a year and a half. Now you need to learn about these things from 101. I think the time has come in where our TD for teachers need to be at another level now. And it's all about pedagogy and how do we help them there. The basics around how you might use this tool is gone now. They spend enough time on it. So I think on our side at a TDSB, we had a centralized virtual learning model. I believe that it cannot be sustained. So we need to go back to our traditional brick and mortar school.
Right.
Let them set up that remote learning, online e-learning within their classroom, within the teacher allocations they have. And we will continue to support that model at a local level so parents will have easy access to the school leadership and the teachers. When you're dealing with 20,000 kids in one elementary school, how do you navigate that? 20,000 kids in one virtual school, elementary virtual school we have.
That's
We
way
cannot
too
service,
complex.
we
Yeah,
cannot meet the needs. So
good
we
point.
needed to go to that local model and support that one. I think another piece is opportunity. If all the key players buy into is for synchronous learning. So you might have a class sitting physically in front of you, but at the same time, you might have 3, 4, 5 kids connecting with you remotely at the same time.
Right.
When I say other partners, I meant our unions on board, right?
Mhm.
And as teachers, colleges are also supporting that kind of model.
I was going to mention that
Are we
teacher
still
colleges need to pivot.
are we still arguing about if we can record a classroom or a Zoom session? Are we still debating that
Right,
after a year and a half? What are the things we needed to put in place? I think it's going to be a little bit of a different kind of school
right,
opening. There's excuses for no technology in place. I need to learn more. You need to provide me PD are out the window.
right,
We need to go from not 0 to 60. We need to go from 60 to 120 now.
right.
That's how I see
Brilliant.
it.
Thank
I
you
just
so
want to
much
know
for that.
how many BPs a principal who has 20,000 students gets.
Good point.
I think there's a principal assigned to every grade at that school.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Dr. Mario Chason, did you want to provide a comment on this one? You're kindly muted.
Yeah, yes, I am. Yeah, I'm just listening there, paying and thinking at the
You're a
same
great
time.
listener. You're a deep
Yeah,
listener. You're so
sometimes
deep you
I
keep
have-
forgetting to put your mic on.
Yeah, short term and long term.
Yeah.
September. Yeah, lots of variable. We just don't know where we are at in terms of this. But organization that through this pandemic, stay behind and observe and think. Right, these are more the people at more organizations that are going to have success because they had the opportunity to think and establish a new vision. So what is a vision about what's an agile school could be?
Mhm.
Right, and it pertain to what Stephen and were saying, and as well of Peter. We have an amazing opportunity to redesign this. What is learning? Industry has completely transformed and embracing a lot more the VR as professional development that never did before. What does it mean of the role of the school within that new economy? So yeah, so there's time to reflect on the long term, right? What the role of the school within the community would be, and on the short term, we have to be fun as a way to be agile and as much malleable to provide any context.
I love that notion of agility and adaptability. I just shared in one of our reports that medical doctors have had a difficult time getting access to operating rooms for practicing. And so there was a story about the whole VR movement around mission critical learning. And this speaks to a question that I didn't have shared with you. There's so much technology, but do we have all the right technologies to enable the dynamic, engaging learning? I've heard from one wise CIO here at the table that the Hollywood squares of learning does not necessarily cut it. So what's missing for the benefit of potential partners or innovators or ed tech startups? Because let's face it, Canada is getting a lot of attention now with some of those startups that have just skyrocketed in success because of their innovative spirit and best practice. So, Kurt, do you want to comment on that one when
Sure.
it comes to what might be missing?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everyone else. I mean, we're not at zero anymore, and I think things like virtual computer labs, remote science labs, virtual chemistry, simulation, like there's lots of space there. I only know of one company that does a really good job of virtual simulations, and it's not the content's not necessarily aligned with the curriculum. So that's a big piece as well, because the tool has to align with what you're trying to teach. So and then the other big thing that I see is a lot of companies contact us and they have no idea what the procurement mechanisms are, right? So they think they're going to walk in and sell us hundreds of $1,000s worth of something without going through a public tender or without going through a purchasing group. That's another big thing. But there's a ton of opportunity, even from that AI bot piece. But for me, really, even if we're fully back and there's no more, online learning, I would still be looking at virtual labs and virtual computer labs, all that kind of stuff.
Well said. Gentlemen, who else wants to jump on that one? What's missing?
Yeah.
Mario?
Oh, I won't have much more to say besides that. The vision and the new dimension of learning is VR and AR. We all know that simulation is one important. In fact, as part of our research study there about the entrepreneur project, we got 37 school, but in fact we got a 38 one. We got a full VR school where all the 37 school can jump in. I mean, we're in the making, in the process of creating that structure in place, and we're going to bring members of the community to communicate to our students to do authentic learning. So that, it's a new dimension that we need to embrace, right? Okay, to address the gap between the formal education and the innovative society.
Thank you for that. We're going to be wrapping up momentarily. Stephen Wiffen, do you have any thoughts on what might be missing?
Yeah, I think one of our biggest issues right now is a lack of standards for kind of portal interoperability, and that is to say, like I never see a scenario where we land on one product that's going to service everything we need. So we're always going to have some pieces we're taking in from different vendors. And if everyone has its own parent portal, for example, like we're to the point now where we're signing up parents for 8 parent portals, and it's just it's creating a huge problem, and
Right.
the connectedness there is a failed opportunity. I'd like to see an education industry standard around how parent portals interop with each other.
Fascinating. So, final thoughts, lessons learned, and what advice you might offer around future technology plans in terms of crisis prevention. How is this going to impact your future planning 2, 3, 5 years out? What the state we're in?
I can start, Robert. I think 5 years is too far.
Wow.
I still look at the form of months. I'd rather work with 12 months, 24 months, and 36 months. Seems like a shorter time span, and the years feel like far away. I think we needed to figure out that the way we got caught short on so many fronts part of this pandemic, that means our disaster recovery plans and business continuity plans were not well done on all fronts. They're not just IT related work. It's a business, it's the entire business that needs to look at that overall enterprise level risk management practice in place. I think there's a huge opportunity for organizations to spend some cycles on that one, so we never get short on this one.
Good point.
So that's one opportunity I see in the near future for us. Technology will evolve, new problems come in, new solutions will be offered. That's life on technology side. But I think for business to truly understand, I found that IT brand within the organization has gone up because we were able to solve problems for them in real time. We were able to automate them. We were the process thinkers at the table. They liked our project management side of things. They knew we can bring bodies and resources to the table to help address problems. So to me, we all inherit our teams, which are multi-talented teams. Now the goal is, how does this leadership needs to shift and start to figure out how to repurpose that multi-talented teams within our organization to really take it to the next level. So those are the things I'm seeing that we needed to focus on, and don't forget the well-being and mental health side of our staff, not just for students, even for our own staff and ourselves and our families too. I think part of the IT strategy, you have to have that well-being or mental health piece also part of the strategy, so you keep a close tab on individuals. And lately I learned one individual was continuously working. Only time this individual would take a break when the internet went down.
Wow.
The individual loves the work, very passionate about it, but we as leaders needs to catch these things to make sure these individuals are not burning out. right?
Yeah.
So it's not just one department, it's across entire organizations. We need to
That's-
help people navigate those things. So those
Peter,
are
well
some of the
said. The people
opportunity I'm seeing.
Yeah, the people behind the scenes need to take care of themselves as well as the frontline, educators and students and parents. Just for the record, I'm going to play hockey at 5:30 in our local rink because there is no hockey indoors. So taking full advantage of a nice cold winter. Over to you, Stephen Wiffen. Final thoughts?
Sorry, I left my mic off that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, and I know this was said earlier, one of the things we have to be conscious of more than ever is security is something that we better be paying attention to, or it could be the thing that sets us back, right? There's so much information we have on kids that's starting to fly around, and we're connecting them to so many pieces. If we're not diligent around how we make sure we're making good decisions on student data, how we're keeping it safe. Like for us, a big part right now is how we're training teachers to manage these tremendous tools that they're starting to work with. And one thing that's amazing about teachers, you give them tools and they start doing things you don't think about with them, right? And they just innovate. It's a natural thing for teachers to do. We have right now in our organization 16,000 teams, 16,000. And so I have to wrap my head around how we manage all the just tremendous amount of data that exists in that, and the security and the data retention and the management. It's an unheralded piece that we don't talk about as an educational issue very much, but we probably ignore it to our peril as this thing moves forward. And it does need to get on the radar. I'm sure as a topic for a future discussion. So
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Stephen. Over to you, Kurt.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I had the information security as the number one thing as well. I mean,
Wow.
security incidents are becoming routine. So, it's happening all across, public sector, private sector. It's not all necessarily a question of if, it's more a question of when and how are you going to respond to it and what have you done to prevent it, right? Other things, I think, we shouldn't lose the lessons that we've learned because, there's a human tendency to want to revert back to the way things were. Don't stop collaborating with others. And I think Peter's comment about organizational maturity is huge as well. I mean, it really is not about IT and technology. It's about risk management. It's about future proofing. It's about planning as an organization. And the last two pieces are just remote access being huge, and then agility, right?
Well said. Mario Jason, final words and thoughts about future proofing and advice for other systems.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I think that, all my colleagues tackle, all the elements. One element I will talking about is the quality of the learning experience and the quality of the teaching experience at the end of the day that matters, right? Because that's what the performance of the community will be about.
Wow, that was short and sweet. Thank you so much, Mario. Very impactful. Definitely areas of common interest on a national scale. I make note of data privacy, internet access, equity, well-being, indigenization of learning. There are certainly opportunities for us to work as a national organization to make a greater impact in collaboration with other partners. I'm excited about that, and I'm grateful for your time today. And we have Dr. Bonnie Smith, the founder and CEO of Let's Talk Science, joining us to thank you and say a few words. Bonnie, I've just promoted you as a panelist, so thank you for joining us. If you would like to give your thanks for our participants today. So you can turn on your camera if you like as well. I'm going to stand. I've been sitting so long here.
I am.
There you are.
There.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
gentlemen.
There you are.
It was, the one time today in which my technology failed me. I won't keep everyone too long, but I want to say I really do hope this is the first of many conversations. I thought the panel was fantastic, and wearing my hat as one of the C21 community advisors, I offer that group brings together quite a lot of different kinds of organizations in all parts of the country that are sharing your passion and your commitment for kids. I think some observations on the call today on your webinar, your use of evidence, your use of you're really thinking about infrastructure partners to make sure that all kids and all families can be served. But what really struck me, what I so deeply appreciate about all of your responses, was the care and the empathy that you have shown to ensure that kids and parents and teachers are safe and well resourced. Every one of you spoke about families in a way that you often don't hear CIOs talking about families and communities and neighborhoods. And for that, I just deeply thank you as a community member myself. And it's been a difficult time for all of you to manage your own groups, because you would be working quite a lot with getting the technology response going. So thank you for your response and your leadership in helping to get technology to a level of discussion that we need it to be in this country. We must start thinking differently about blended learning opportunities, about community partnerships, about how we help teachers who don't know where the technology might be applicable. How do we upskill them really quickly and keep pedagogy at the center of it? I think COVID has shown us that schools are an anchor of our neighborhoods, and schools aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Teachers are critical for what happens within the community, within the classroom, but technology can really help us go and do things that we never even thought possible, even 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So I look forward to the next discussions. I thank you for sharing your lessons, because those of us in the audience are taking lots of notes, and we'll think differently about how we can support you and support schools and support kids and teachers. So I do look forward to the next conversation, and just want to thank you on behalf of the C21 Advisory Group.
With that, thank you so much, Bonnie, and to our panelists and to our delegates. There you have our c21canada.org URL and email if you want further information. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.